why do you think so many people are hysteric right now? And how can they look for some form of hope? I feel like a lot of their perceptions are from the media. So should they just turn the news off?
Well, I guess it goes back to what we've been talking about with the news is like, are you actually divining something helpful for you that is congruent with helping you like be who you want to be and get where you want to get? Or is this some kind of like destructive addiction that you would be better off without? I think 99.9% of the time for 99.9% of people, they would do better with less of this stuff. And one thing that I'm noticing as we just reference, like scrolling up and down my news feed, which I would love to do 99.9% less while we're talking about it, over a period of months, and thinking about it through the prism of someone who's about to start putting information into the atmosphere, is you have these prominent publications and also like lesser known people, individuals and institutions that have realized that if you're screaming about, you know, a billionaire's money going up, you can scream equally loudly about the billionaire's money going down. And so for me, as I'm thinking about this, I shouldn't say any names, but like prominent things that I follow, I have wasted energy hearing them scream about, you know, Bezos's and Musk's and whatever net worth go up 150 billion and then down 150 billion. I didn't need to know either of those things. That's just natural volatility. That's just the pendulum swinging. And so that is completely valueless. And so the thing is, like, of these things that are actually actively consuming my attention with an opportunity cost, you could be doing anything with that energy. Is this addition by subtraction? And in my case, is in terms of informing our ability to talk about this in exactly this way right now, arguably no. For the average person who's just trying to like get through this thing and make more than they spend and make good investments and sort of like get off the merry-go-round on time, on target, with no harm, no foul done to anyone in their family, I think it's a tremendous waste of time and a potentially horribly negative redirect of their energy, because every time that you read that kind of stuff, it's effective because there's an emotional charge. And if you take too many of those little emotional microcharges, all of a sudden now you're like, the slightest thing can cause you to start like spazzing all over yourself and potentially all over your portfolio.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that right now in the markets. Lots of volatility, lots of things going down, lots of companies' stock price dropping. In the previous episode where we covered the pendulum swinging, you mentioned that you know when you're hysteria when people who ordinarily don't have an opinion are coming to you and telling you what you should do or how you should be feeling. And almost everybody is coming at me in the shop and talking about tariffs. And a lot of these people I never talk to about investing, even though I've told them that I'm going to be on an investing podcast very soon. And it's just really interesting to me because I don't know if my perspective is just purely swayed from hanging out with yourself and like thinking about things in this way, but it seems logical to like want to get away from that. Like I always like tried to avoid the news when I could. I guess in terms of the emotional charge, how do you see that show up in your interactions with people, both with Fatfish and just like day to day?
Yeah, well, for me, I think I just scribbled down the little maxim: when in doubt, zoom out. And so I'm trying to think about it not just in terms of this specific incident, but any incident that was like this. And so to me, I mean, the last time that it felt as a whole that we were in this level of, we could definitely use the word hysteria, was COVID. And so obviously that was a big deal. That was not a small deal. And there's a very good chance that what's going on right now, not just with tariffs, but with like Trump's presidency as a whole, and Elon Musk getting this like all you can eat, it seems like, buffet access to things that's like, how are you getting access to like this much without being elected to do so? Like, it all feels not trivial. But at the same time, as we talked about during that last episode, if you were to zoom out and think about how we're thinking about and talking about COVID right now, 5 years after the fact, is it possible that 5 years from now, with the tariffs, it will be the same or significantly less? Because I see some people, and I'm not going to like strike a a political pose about vaccines or anything like this, but some people are saying things that probably were freaking out at the time. They're probably saying things like, I can't believe that we kicked up such a fuss over a flu that had a 99.99% survival rate. And so if you're able to say something like that, that trivializes something that seemed like such a big deal at the time, is it possible that 5 years down the track or faster, people will be trivializing this or maybe just forgetting it entirely? It's just those moments where a page one headline captures the imagination, probably the greed and the terror of the entire planet at the same time. And then people are talking about it out of turn, jumping to conclusions without actually doing deep research and coming to their own independent understandings based on like history and best practices and all of this. And there's just this sort of this just loud, it's the exact, I guess, this echo chamber of horror. Like, is that an environment where good decisions are going to be made or bad decisions? And would you be better off, to your point, just acknowledging that this is a moment of maximum pessimism or approaching maximum pessimism, where you'd be better off, A, questioning every assumption, zooming out and thinking as long-term as you can, and not impulse twitching and letting the fast twitch muscle that leads you to click on like New York Times or Fox News over and over and over cause you to do the same thing in your brokerage, like to your great detriment. Would be basically questions that I would ask. Obviously, everyone is free to come to their own conclusions, and they should. But I do think it's fair to say that this is same shit, different day, if you've been doing this kind of stuff long enough.
Yeah, in terms of coming to your own conclusions, obviously being around yourself and like understanding these kinds of perspectives that you have, my perspective is definitely far from the average person who's probably stressing out right now with the things going on. One of the things that I saw as I was editing the most recent episode was you talking about the actual duration of Trump's presidency, and you're saying that it's only going to be 4 years max because you can only have 3 terms in the States, right? So, 2 terms.
2 terms. It was so, I mean, but then there are, I mean, and again, this is being published in Fed, I think, because it is great edutainment or entertainment and definitely great fear mongering. Is like, there's talk about how by using loopholes, Trump could pursue a 3rd term. That hasn't been done since FDR, who I believe had 4 terms during wartime, if I'm right about that. And so that obviously is a click machine, because that's like arguably treason and everything. And so it's high drama. And so it's a click magnet. And so the whole thing is, people would be rightly terrified or angry or whatever emotion about the prospect of that. At the same time, are you being careful that you're not letting these fears mean something that they don't actually mean and cause you to do things that you'll come to massively regret when this becomes a distant memory, which it will?
Yeah, I guess in hindsight, to draw the comparison to COVID, there were so many firm stances in Wellington, and I'm sure around the world as well, right? But where I was at the time, there was like a big protest at our Parliament House, and everyone formed a hard stance opinion, and I just preferred to stay apolitical with it. Like, I'm not against them, I'm not with them, I'm just open-minded and keen to talk to people. And that was so rare at the time because so many people were cussing them out, calling them idiots and things like that, and vice versa. Whereas now everyone's just chill about it, everyone's forgot, and people just integrate back into society. Yeah. Right.
And so, I mean, again, but like we're more in the realm of faith and like religion than we are math and science. This is in a lot of ways grounded in the unknown and the unknowable about what exactly is going to happen. And so it is a good opportunity, among other things, to check in with yourself. Like, what do I believe? What does the sort of pot that I'm existing in as a well-dressed crab, like, what does the pot believe? Are there any differences between us? And like, should there be? And make sure that, I mean, it's a good time to gut check your belief and also your fact-based faith in in what you've chosen to like have your worldview be. I don't mind saying that unless there was an extraordinarily good reason, I'm happy to, I prefer to live in a world where there's 15 or more right answers to every question. I am anti a U.S. president having 3 terms unless there was a ridiculously good reason for that. But at the same time, I have faith that, and this was my narrative during Trump's first tenure in office, which people similarly were freaking out about at the time, arguably with good reason, arguably not. But essentially that this was going to be a good opportunity for the checks and balance systems, the sort of nervous system of the government in the U.S. to sort of check itself. And that proved to be true in a flawed way, but still a true way. I continue to believe that. But people can and should believe whatever it is that like their informed optimism and informed pessimism leads them to believe, regardless of what it is. My contention is that there are things, if we're talking about investing, there are things that are orders of magnitude bigger even than this, that we can be putting our money in a reasonably safe way, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And so, like, I've talked to former clients just as a check-in, like, knock, knock, how you doing, who are thinking about, who are like, their temperaments are shaking and they've been prepared for this, but that's their war to win with the tools that I provided, but I can't do that for them. Some of whom are chill and some of whom are opportunistic and some of whom are thinking about bowing out because of U.S. politics. And
out of the States.
No, well, some people talk about leaving the U.S., but I'm talking about more like, sell everything, put it under the mattress. And as I've said in a previous episode, we tend to become very tactile under fear. And I just think that if you ask good enough questions and you zoom out enough and you have informed optimism about what it is that you're doing, the companies and the management teams that you're choosing to trust, the trends that you're choosing to back, the long-term outcomes that you're choosing to fund, in essence, there are many, many, many that their existence is not imperiled by the tariffs. And again, this provides a good opportunity to double down on understanding what you believe and why you believe it. And if you take that invitation and you use it as that opportunity, if it exposes that actually everything that you've been doing feels like it's been built on sand, that's a different conversation. You should probably look to correct that as soon as you can. But if what you've done and built is thoughtful, from where I'm sitting, these kinds of hysteric moments across society, even though grounded in fact and reason, they tend to be overblown in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. For people that have started investing and they bought their first stock, or they might be years into the game, one of the things that I've noticed with the temperament of individuals that come into the barbershop that talk about things that are going on in the US and with, I guess, the state of the world in terms of investing, is there's a disconnect between understanding the pure mechanics of investing, what it takes to have the confidence to buy and hold after researching, and the time horizon of business success. It's almost as though that connection between the mechanics and the business success that you're invested in, it washes a cloud through it. Do you have any points on like trying to get rid of that cloud beyond the news?
Can you tell me a little bit more about the cloud?
I guess the cloud, it kind of shows up in that a lot of people are paying attention to these news sources or these fields of information that are wafting through social circles and social media. But a lot of it isn't actionable. A lot of it is just straight fear. So beyond cutting through that and trying to look for hope and optimism, informed optimism, is there anything that comes to mind for those types of people?
I guess I'm having trouble reading the trouble that they're having. So they've made investments for the right reasons, but they're fueling themselves from the wrong sources? Or like what exactly is their situation?
I guess their belief is shaken.
In what?
The state of the world.
Yeah. Well, essentially, so we'll go back. I was just reading a good book by Hermosi, who's one of the big, great names in the business space. And he was saying that people need to be reminded more than they need to be educated or trained. And that resonates, because I hate, on instinct, I like with a creative writing background, you hate to repeat yourself. But then if you're actually like trying to help people toward an outcome, you probably want to repeat yourself a la politician. And so one of the things that we talked about that is at the core of what we're talking about now is I created this tool for clients that I give to them during week 8, where we talk about perception, the perception of, I say, the press and therefore the public, who tends to follow the scribblings of the press like sheeple. And so the best quote about perception that I've run into was Sir John Templeton, who popularized investing outside of your country. So one of the first long-term investors to come at it from a truly active global worldview was, bull markets are born on pessimism, rise on skepticism, mature on optimism, and die on euphoria. Therefore, the moment of maximum pessimism is the best time to buy, and the moment of maximum optimism is the best time to sell. As mentioned, I agree with 95% of what he wrote there. And what we're talking about here is the pendulum swings from euphoria to hysteria and back. And sometimes you don't know exactly where you are on that pendulum, but you should, whether you're talking about a company, a commodity, a currency, the entire global economy, you should know directionally from what, like, if you take 10 Uber rides or talk to all of your relatives, from what they're saying to you, you should have a pretty decent idea about where you stand. And what we're talking about here is that it feels like everything at the moment is either in pessimism or hysteria, probably closer to hysteria, although this can go on for a surprisingly long time, or it could end at the drop of a hat tomorrow, because all of a sudden US is like, oh, our bad, no more tariffs, and then this all just goes away. We don't know, right? But at the moment, it seems like it is somewhere between pessimism and hysteria. And so I think the simple understanding that is the case can take a lot of the edge off for people, where it's like, listen, like, this, scary as it is not a first in human history. This arguably isn't even close to being the most dramatic thing that's happened like this century. And so let's put things in perspective. And then in terms of the investments that you've actually got, wouldn't it be better to take it on a company by company basis rather than trying to sweep everything into the same category, which admittedly can be very difficult. If one of the problems with diversification is, if you made the emotional decision to buy 500 companies at once, it can be very psychologically difficult to then think about them one by one. But if you made your investments one at a time, it's like, well, let's see, what exactly does it mean that these tariffs have gone into place? And then if you think about it in a thoughtful way, what does the implication, given this company's operations in different countries, if we have a decent understanding of like the global pie chart of their operations, how much are they actually going to be affected at all? And might there actually be unexpected silver linings if this plan plays out exactly as we're saying that it's going to? And so do you see what I mean? Like, by asking one question at a time, zooming out, then zooming in, thinking about this in broader, long-term, calmer, emotional terms, and then calmly, company by company, thinking about the odds of their survival first and foremost, we can begin to sort of take this overwhelming thing and chunk it down into like a manageable increment.
Yeah. Chunking down is kind of exactly what I've done. I think you'd be proud of me if you saw me in the barbershop.
I already am proud of you.
Oh, cheers. Yeah, with the conversations, it was just like really interesting because there was only, I guess, one person in particular that pops out and is front of mind when it comes to having a coherent conversation in terms of chunking down. Everyone else was just super far in fear. But with that person that I was able to chunk down with, the immediate implications on the New Zealand-based companies that trade in the States, there already was a tariff and it's going up by 7%. And the original tariff was 10% for New Zealand companies trading with the US, and now it's 17%. So I don't know if anyone's invested in New Zealand companies right now. That's kind of the go. But beyond that, like, I'm invested in a US company, and yeah, things are hectic, but I haven't really bothered because, like you said, Trump's really going to be around for another 4 years, right? And so even if things are awful, it's only another 4 years in my head. And a lot of people would think, oh, that's a crazy time horizon. Well, I'm thinking much longer term than that.
To be fair, I mean, it's a good point.
Yeah.
In the first place, like, how much, like, all of a sudden everyone's an expert on tariffs? It's like, that's like, now you're presuming to be an expert on the implications of a tariff. How many tariffs have occurred that you were completely oblivious to and were just going through your day? That's one thing. The second thing, though, in mild contradiction, is the way that has unspooled has been loud, and it has been truly global. And that's the thing about the U.S. is, like, by instituting it as broadly, like, it does impact a great many companies. But at the same time, I was just researching a company that I think is a potential fat fish on Friday, and they were explaining, and this is, mind you, this was 3 or 4 months ago that this presentation that I was going through was from, but they were saying they basically issued a perfect defense against this in advance, where they were like, given that we are broadly diversified in, first of all, our geography of what we're serving, but then also the ways that we're offering services and the number of different clients that we have is also broadly diversified. It would be difficult for us to be safer and less vulnerable to macro headwinds, which this stuff is often like lumped into. And so if you think about it, essentially what I'm saying is, when in doubt, zoom out, think about it in terms of the perception pendulum. Where are we? Is this because we're never going to live permanently in hysteria. The world would just go to black. Like, it would never, that is impossible. And so we're not going to be here forever. And like, sooner or later, it's going to swing the opposite way. And then it's going to be euphoria, where everyone's telling you with frenzied optimism to do something. So like, sooner or later, the pendulum's going to swing. Where are we directionally? Just understand that this is temporary, and it's not grounded fundamentally in logic, and it needs to be solved in different terms, just thinking about it on like a global view. But then it can be solved in certain respects through logic, by then looking at your specific investments and really asking the question, is this imperiling the existence or the future prosperity of these things that I have chosen to put money into, with like at the potential cost of my retiring on time, having a retirement at all, providing for my family, etc. And if you can do a thoughtful job of that independently, you can solve the problem. If you can't do a thoughtful job of that independently, if you can't get the voices and to sort of like stop and then coalesce into an actionable through line, then I would highly suggest seeking support one way or another.
Something I just jotted down here, you mentioned macro headwinds. Where my head went to as you were mentioning that piece is, you can sail in a headwind. Things just might get a bit rocky, and how you sail accurately, to my perception from all of the conversations I've had with you, is utilizing true critical thinking to find informed optimism in one or several companies to your liking.
That sounds good. But then, of course, that's the philosophical piece. That's the chess game. That is not the sort of like emotional checkers of then putting money in and actually like doing the thing. But that can be as easy as falling asleep.
Yeah.
Peter Lynch said it well. It's not about trading. It's about snoring.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, that is the best solution. That is not always the best solution, but oftentimes that is the best thing. And the worst thing that you can do right now is have an itchy trigger finger and like be screaming in a permanent falsetto as you're like, oh, and then just making a billion mistakes. You'd be better off literally in a Taco Bell induced coma, at least from a financial perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because as confident as I may seem, like as soon as you hit that reminder about what it actually is, I just felt like a gulp, like a visceral fear. It's like, yeah, that's all it is, but it's still not easy because there's something on the line, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about, I mean, people can get stressed out about play money, but I'm interested in talking to people that either are or are determined to figure out how to like invest their own blood money. Essentially everything that you've got, everything that you're going to have independently, with everything at stake, not the least of which is your independence, your understanding that when you're older and more vulnerable, you're going to be good, and that you can extend the piece of that to the people around you, at least extending optionality to the people around you, if not sort of the inevitability of freedom. And so, yeah, so not small stakes. And so being able to do the right thing at these moments is exactly what it's about. And the thing that I have learned in teaching people how to do this for a long time, and now educating myself and putting into motion like an extension of the service. The service is a transformation about how to show people how to identify what it is that they actually want and why, and put it where they're going to see it so they don't slip off of their own like personal vision, and then learn within the context of making that happen how to pick their own stocks, invest their own money, zig when Joey Public is zagging, and so on. That is excellent. That can be achieved in 8 weeks. It's interesting in teaching people how to then follow through on it. I do think that community would be quite helpful. And to this point, I have been slack, to be honest, about I have been like a zealot. Like our greatest weaknesses are casualties of our greatest strengths. That applies here and everywhere. I have been a zealot about independence, where I'm like, you've got the modules, you've got it, follow through. But it's become very clear, similarly to what I referenced before, people need to be reminded more than they need to be trained. That a lot of people are going to require some form of extroverted energy community to be able to consistently handle those headwinds and not have the sails come off at the exact worst moment. Because it never gets easy. I think it gets easier, but it's never easy. And as you get more experience, the stakes go up. And so but I've helped people learn how to do this at 72 and actually get after it. And so it's not like it's too late unless you run out of a combination of money and time and energy and optimism all at once, and you're like just out of inputs. It's not too late, but it is worth respecting, to your point, the challenge of the headwinds, because it's scary when you're 25 and you're investing $2,000. And it's scary when you're 65 and you're like, I really want to fire my financial advisor because he's taking 2 and 20 and providing nothing. But like I feel deep down like I'm like out of my league, too old, whatever. It's scary for everyone, and that should be respected, but it should also be challenged.
Yeah, in terms of community, what I was thinking of in that wider piece is like, if I'm feeling a gulp, like at the mention of exactly what it is, and I'm arguably getting like tutelage from someone who's very far down the track compared to most in terms of investing, then I couldn't imagine how everyone else is feeling exactly. In terms of finding comfort in the face of fear, in the past for myself, it's always helped to surround yourself with other people that are facing a similar fear. Like for fighting, for instance, one of the things that I always found is it's a lot easier to go out to a fight when you've got 3 guys that know how to fight right with you. Not because they're going to jump in and fight the guy, but because they understand what you're going through, they've been there before, and they know how to help you through it.
It's a good point. And I have noticed, to your point, that as somebody who's gone to, I like training at fight gyms. I like being surrounded by like active assassins because they tend to be nicer. Yeah. They tend to be kinder. Like I go to these other gyms where there's like a purple floor and like Katy Perry like blasting, and you get this like little Nerdburger on the pec deck, like mean mugging you. And I'm like, what? I was like, and I feel like that is like investing for beginners, like Facebook group where people are like hating on each other and everything. It's like the same thing. It's like, yeah, when you're actually around people that have enough experience that they have some perspective and some ability, they're likely to be much more compassionate, which actually does frighten me then about the investors that aren't compassionate, because it's like, why would you, like, what is, I feel like I heard Bill Burr talking about this recently, but it's like, what exactly is your beef with the average person, considering that you were blessed into a situation where you were 99th percentile everything, and now you're in this impossibly privileged position? Like, what exactly is your beef with these people that are trying to get by? I don't understand that, and I definitely stand against that. But I do think it's important to understand that not everyone is like that, and there are plenty of people that are out there that are trying to help elevate everyone in their blast radius, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I guess what comes to mind in terms of the fight gym reference and like understanding the culture and spaces between good cultures and bad cultures, one of the things I always like to remind myself of, I've chosen the places I surround or the people I surround myself with very carefully, but if no one's told you, you have agency, right? Like, for everyone listening to this, you can choose to be around sources of information or people that make you feel comfortable, make you feel like someone's actually being nice to you instead of me mugging you on the machine, right? Like, people have that choice.
That's a really good point. And that's like, if I'm totally honest, and I know that this is reductive, because there are people that have a foot in both worlds or both mentalities, but generally speaking, I have seen like the entrepreneurial mentality is someone who is mastered the art of sacred selfishness, saying no, trying to optimize everything, getting better. And someone who is like slunk too far into the 9-to-5 mentality is, among other things, complaining about their reliance on institutions but doing nothing about it. And sort of like, as a default, to me, like the perfect symptom of it is they're like complaining about not being able to say no to the coworker going around with the homemade donuts, where it's like, I don't have time to exercise, I can't say no to the donuts in the break room. And I think, mind you, I would have a hell of a hard time if I was in that exact situation saying, no, I want people to like me, etc. But it's like finding the entrepreneurial ethos, or even just the basic agency of saying no when it suits you, and saying yes when it scares you a little bit. And I think that is a very good point. It's like essentially giving yourself permission to control your environment within reason. And if that involves setting up an internet blocker so that you don't have to look at another unhelpful social media feed or news headline again, that's fine. If it's telling somebody in your world, hey, like, I appreciate your perspective, not really interested in having this kind of conversation with you anymore, not getting a lot out of it, it's having that conversation. If it's getting more distance than that, I don't recommend just cutting people out because they're saying something you don't like, but having the conversation, and if necessary, for your own like sacred selfishness, your own psychological well-being, you know, that's absolutely your prerogative. But it's a good point, and it's so elemental to where you need to go psychologically to start a business, among so many other things. It's actually something that I don't even think about anymore. But if you have slipped into a bit of a rut, you probably should be conducting an audit on your boundaries and your values and where you are and aren't saying no. And Jim Rohn, who originally was Tony Robbins's mentor, has a famous line about that that's really good, which is essentially stand guard at the door of your mind, something like that, which is kind of a mystical way to put it. But it's like, be careful about who and what you're allowing, especially in high stakes situations and like vulnerable moments.
Yeah, in terms of vulnerable moments, one of the conversations that I had last week really sticks out to me as he mentioned that, and I wrote down here, fear seeks validation. Coming from a very intelligent guy, you know, always have like meaningful discussions with this man, and he was just, every headline you could imagine just firing straight out at me. And it got to the point where I told him, I don't really want to have this conversation. I'm not in like the space where I want to be like tampered with emotionally by something that's happening across the water. Like, I'm trying to have hope for my future, and he kept hammering down. And that's just the way that things are when people are really in fear, I think. So to counterpoint to your understandings around these types of people, I think if you're feeling like you're in the dark, you have to look for the light at the end of the tunnel. Because if you don't have a waypoint towards informed optimism, like you say, then really you're just going to sit in the dark with all the other people that are in the dark.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm thinking now of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 4-Hour Work Week, where taken to the extreme, it can become narcissistic, bordering on solipsistic. You know,
what does that mean?
A narcissist says, I'm the most beautiful thing in the world. A solipsist says, I am the world. You literally have no regard for any other consciousness other than yours, etc. You can take this obviously too far, but you can also take it not far enough, where you're essentially the maximum in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is mind your own business. And I use sacred selfishness, but essentially, yeah, like, what is it that I'm about? Like, what is this year about for me? What is my purpose just for my entire life? Like, what am I trying to get done here and why? And then if you really understand that clearly, and I have worked with so many coaches, and that's always where it starts, because it has to. Because if you're not clear on what this is about, it's the same thing with writing a book or a screenplay or a speech or whatever. If you're not sure about what it's about, then how do you have any direction about what you're doing? And so I think the first thing is just getting ultra clear on that, and then it becomes much easier to say no. But then if somebody doesn't respect your boundaries around that, then yeah, I mean, like, they're putting you in a hard spot, but you have every right. And that's the thing about the news that I struggle with, because I've been consuming more news lately than I typically do. And I think it's had a bad impact on my psyche and peace of mind, amongst many other things, including my productivity and my reflex to, like, reach for the next thing and, like, help the next person. And I wonder if people, and obviously in this exact moment in time, it makes sense why that would be. But if that's how you are 120 months out of the decade, is that how you want it? What's that actually about? And yeah, it's a question to consider. And I actually would recommend solidly 4-Hour Work Week's second section called Elimination. Again, it can be perceived as being too much of a good thing, but to read it as a thought experiment and be like, okay, if I was going to make like 1 or 2 implementations from this, what would help me the most? I think almost anyone in the world, especially people that are struggling and like drowning in informed and uninformed pessimism, would do very, very well to earmark 2 hours and do that, because it would save you probably hundreds of hours of unnecessary suffering, like, as an inevitability.
Yeah, to briefly cover that, those chapters.
Read that section of 4-Hour Work Week, and then good thing about that book is he has like suggested actions. Choose one. Yeah,
just one.
Do it. And I'm thinking of the essentially the low or no information diet as something just to consider. I think that if I was really acutely suffering and I was like treating the news and social media like you're just drinking from the world's most toxic fire hose, you can't stop, that would be a band-aid that I would yank if it were really a problem.
Yeah, same here. We were briefly just talking about this off the air just before, but I recently listened to a podcast by a very intelligent woman, Anna Lemke, I think is how you pronounce her surname, but she's a world-leading researcher on the science of dopamine and how it affects your physiology and psychology. And one of the key points that I took from that is that you can pretty much be addicted to anything. She even said in the podcast that someone could be addicted to water, and that actually happened with one of her clinical clients. Shocking stuff, but I definitely think there's a lot of people addicted to the news. So if you want to stop, I reckon treat it like an addiction, and maybe listen to Anna Lemke and some of her stuff, maybe even read her book, and understand that, you know, it takes time, but it's worth stepping away from for all of the aforementioned reasons.
It's worth saying also that because like to me, like that's sound and obvious advice. Then I think that the reason that people have trouble doing it is maybe because they're not clear enough on why it's hurting them. But to give you a sense also, I think there's an idea of bottom fishing amongst the carnage. And so the people that actually do well to be in, like, wading in these waters and studying them carefully are people that are trying to size up exactly what I'm talking about for any given company or currency or cryptocurrency or the entire economy. When are we genuinely at hysteria, pessimism? And then they're trying to, buy dollars for pennies. And so there are people that are consuming the same information, but like, have you considered the implications of how expensive it is for you that they're studying you for weaknesses so that they can make the most money? And if you do understand that, is there something constructive that you can do about it? The most obvious thing would be to stop. But maybe if you can't stop, and like, for example, I have clients who are, once they learn, because generally speaking, I like the idea of being able to make more by stock picking as a hobby than you earn in your job. But as a hobby, we're talking like under 40 hours, maybe 20 hours, maybe 10 hours a year. Can't promise it, have delivered it, have accomplished it at times. Can't promise it. But like, I like that as an idea. The needle movers pulled with extreme efficiency is a nice idea. I have clients who that doesn't appeal to. They want to be more in it. And some of them can't stop. Some of them don't want to stop. And so for them, the idea isn't to ignore emotion and turning sort of the latest GFC, global financial crisis, into your shopping spree. It is exploiting it. And so actively going in and being in this and trying to have it be that you make incrementally, if not exponentially, more money by investing in real time against people's panic. I view that as not the best use of life, but that is subjective and that's people's call. But I think if I were somebody that couldn't get my hands off if I couldn't get my nose out of the news, I would want someone to observe for me that the people that are in there with me are either freaking out with me and not bringing a helpful perspective, or studying all of us for weaknesses so that they can take us to the cleaners. This is just not where you want to be.
Yeah, completely agree. As you mentioned that before, I was reminded of a conversation I had with a client that works at a coffee company, and he was describing to me the exact accuracy with which people who are in grocery as a business, like selling to the supermarkets, can profile every individual customer, even if they don't have the club cards. But that's what the club cards are for. They're not to give you cool reward points. They're to like profile you down to your age, everything, like your exact spending habits, your archetype. They could tell you more about you than probably someone you just met.
That is, yeah. Well, if you throw in the whole like Big Brother and the amount of data they're collecting on you, honestly, I wasn't even thinking about this anywhere near that deeply.
Yeah.
I find that creepy. A lot of people find that way creepier than me. I'm, in the scheme of things, probably in like the 85th percentile of like tolerating Big Brother. I was like, I have nothing to hide. It's fine. A lot of people do not feel that way. And so if that helps you, then that also helps you. But the big thing is just, I like the term dollars per research hour. I'm only doing that stuff for research. And I view it almost entirely as a waste of energy. And so actually I would share two things. As Jacob and I were talking about, it's nice to reward people that have listened to a conversation for a while rather than just kind of put it. I feel like it insults everyone's intelligence to just like try and make stuff top heavy. But essentially, if there were two things beyond what has been discussed in terms of the perception pendulum and everything that I would want someone to say to me if I were freaking out right now, like during moments of volatility, and this is not the last moment of volatility that any of us are going to experience in the stock market. If we're lucky, we get to live a long time, but there's going to be a lot more moments like this. So learning how to make peace with it is just a good choice for a happy and peaceful life, I think. Taking money out of it even. But first of all, the number one thing that there's very little, like we're mostly operating in the realm of faith here, right? And like the unknown, the unknowable versus math and science. It's mostly emotion and illogic, much more so than logic. But one thing that we do know with mathematical certainty is that if a business does not go out of business, its stock cannot drop to zero. Therefore, when you're thinking about the tariff, or previous to that COVID, or previous to that 9/11, or previous to that whatever else, was that going to drive the company out of business? A company like Amazon, among so many others that have survived and thrived through all of these things, do you think that they're freaking out right now in the global scheme of things? They might be, but if so, why exactly? And think about it like that. It takes a lot of the sting off. And that is how you know that you're not gambling, because your money cannot vaporize. They love to use the word vaporize. Trillions of dollars vaporized from Bitcoin. Like it brings such a great emotional reaction. It's like cinematic. So it cannot vaporize. That is a peaceful thing to know. And I got in a roll there and I forgot what the second thing was. I was trying to just chill people out.
Oh yeah, you had like a preface which was like talking about like if we're lucky we get to experience more. So I don't know if that was actually point one.
Yeah.
That was like that was shocking for me. It's like that's such a valid point. Like it's inevitable. So we're actually lucky if we get to experience more volatility because it means we're alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Best case scenario is more volatility. It's the same thing with your heart palpitations. Generally, we want to be like this. There's going to be moments of this, but you're still lucky.
Yeah.
So there's that. But yeah, honestly, I think in the scheme of things, that's the most important. That's the most important thing is this has happened before. It's going to happen again if we're lucky. If a business won't go out of business, its stock cannot drop to zero. Are you investing in businesses that will not go out of business? Can you explain that to a 6-year-old in 60 seconds? And or can you illustrate the reason why with the crayon? If the answer is no, you are falling afoul of like Warren Buffett, Mark Twain, Peter Lynch. This is not where you want to be. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, we want to understand the important things simply and cut out bullshit that is causing us to either squander time, energy, peace, all of the above.
Sick.